Sometimes there's a decision that's final and sworn upon and chiseled in stone, but then situations change. Hello, everybody. Alongside Don Helbig, I'm Ryan Sir, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans because that's who we are and that's who we care about. That's available wherever you get your podcasts and YouTube. Hit that subscribe button.
All right, let's kick this off by thanking our Prestige members. I want to give a big shout out to Miss Mandy, 1983, Lil Mac, 21, Brian Hauser, 330T, Logan Lipper, Aaron Bort, Jacob Fix, Damon Barnes, Dakota Cole, Eric Grau, Dustin Jackson, Songstress Miku, Lack Ray, Galaxy B-Boy, Medic, 302, Eastern Coaster Guys and Girls, Justin Y, and Mike Garrett. Thank you guys so much for supporting Tower Topics at the highest level. That's the prestige level. If you want to be involved in Tower Topics, there's the link in the description. Members get early access to videos, exclusive content, exclusive live streams, and some tiers even get some free stuff. So hit that link if you want to join us on board.
Ryan, the Six Flags, Kings Island, the MVP season pass sale had some pretty compelling offers. You know, we've talked about it. My feeling is when you're trying to sell a pass for $99 across the portfolio, you're telling people that you are the Walmart of the industry, that you don't feel that you're a premium, product, that your product isn't worth more than that. However, for the consumer, the price points, for Gold Pass, $99, get all 40 parks with that, and Prestige, $199, get all the parks, with that, both very, very compelling, especially when you look at Prestige and what the price, had been and what you get it for now. So when you saw how compelling that price was for both Gold Pass and Prestige, what did you start thinking about?
To me, if you recall, we had a listener question, or maybe it just came up in a discussion where somebody, I think it was a listener question. Somebody asked, you guys have sworn off Prestige. You're never buying Prestige again. What would get you to change your mind? And we said things like, well, if they got like a really nice VIP lounge, that would be tempting, and maybe a couple of other things. What we didn't account for was that, a Gold Pass is more or less $99. It goes up to $120, whatever. But the Prestige Pass was more like the $325 range. What we didn't account for was that the price would be incredibly lower than it ever was. So, to me, I started thinking, what benefits do I get from the Prestige Pass, and what's it worth to me? Because honestly, there are only two things that I care about with the Prestige Pass. I like the preferred parking, and I like the skip the line things, the one-time use fast lanes. The rest of the stuff could come or go. I don't care. The VIP lounge is a joke. And I thought to myself, for $100 more, well, let's say if they offered an upcharge of $50, but you get the parking preferred parking, would I take that? Yep. If they offered an upcharge of $50, one-time fast lane per visit, would I take that? Yep. So at that point, it became a no-brainer. So for 2026, I became a Kings Island Prestige Pass holder, although I had sworn it off in the past.
Well, I mean, you were basing your opinion, I thought, based on what your experience was. You were one of the first buyers of the Prestige Pass. A lot of things that were promised as part of that package were taken away,
Yes.
Changed without notice. I felt you had a reason to be unhappy with the product. But I thought, when they came out with the $199 for it and things that weren't part of the Prestige Pass when you first bought it, things like the one-time, fast lane use, I think that has a lot of value to it. If you go frequently, and you go, 10, 15, 20 or more times, a lot of value there. Let's talk about haunt nights. You go on that Saturday, Columbus Day weekend, everything's going to have a 90-minute, plus wait, but you want to ride the beast.
Right.
There's value to that. Next year, Phantom Theater, opening nightmare, especially the first part of the year, April, May, early June. the wait time is going to be pretty long for that. We're
Sure will.
talking, 75 minutes, 90 minutes, most days, that's what it's going to be for a lot of the day. There's value, there's fast lane there with that ride, so there's value in that, that one-time use. And you make trips to Cedar Point, where without that, you go on a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, without fast lane, or at least that one time, you're gonna have a tough time getting on Top Thrill 2, getting the ride Siren's Curse,
Maverick.
and Maverick, so it adds a lot of value, to that. Different parks, you go to King's Dominion, that Prestige Lounge that they have, that by itself is worth Prestige. If you go there multiple times, you're there more than one day, but it's worth, getting Prestige for it. I was really impressed with their VIP lounge. And I thought, this was the one time I wish I had Prestige, because my friends that I was with there, for those 2 days, they had it. I did get to go into it. The person that was working there allowed me to come in and check it out, and I told him I was considering an upgrade to Prestige, and I wanted to look at it. So very, very much worth it at King's Dominion. But Cedar Point, their VIP lounge, I think it's a little bit better than what Kings Island has to offer. Kings Island's looks nice, but I think it's going to get, with the number of people getting Prestige, there's going to be days where it's very tough to find a seat, a place to sit down in there. It was packed Labor Day weekend, Labor Day. Every time I walked by it, a lot of people in there. So a lot of people have, clearly they've upgraded from gold to Prestige just because of how compelling that price point was. The parking lot, the preferred parking after 11 o'clock, not a space available. You could sit there and wait for somebody to leave or whatever, but that's one of the perks, one of the reasons you're buying it, because of the number that's been sold. I think when you get to those, those weekend dates, it's going to be hard sometimes to find a spot if you don't get there, by noon. So there are some disadvantages to it. I think there's going to be some people that are going to be grumbling about it because they're not getting what they paid for, because they can't find a place in the VIP lounge. They can't find a place at preferred parking every time they go. So there's going to be a little bit of discontent with that. But at the same time, when you look at that one time, fast lane use, and the discount a little bit higher on that pass, if you want to buy merchandise and that kind of stuff, I believe,
15% as opposed to 10 with gold.
Yeah. So, as I was considering, my options too. I did a piece on theme parks by Don, and I basically said there's 3 doors I was considering. I was going to upgrade. I could upgrade the gold pass for $99 and get all 40, parks, and kind of have the same thing that I, enjoyed, that I spent a lot more than $99 for last year when I did the all park passport add-on. Mm-hmm. But that was all included. So that was pretty compelling for me. I looked at Prestige, thought that looked like a lot of value at $199, all 40 parks. It just, there was a lot to like about that. And then the other part of it was because we don't know, with the way the company's been, things are going for it, and all the cuts in that they're making, we don't know what next year looks like, right. So do I wait until, midsummer next year, mid-July or something, when they roll out the same kind of MVP offer again, and get the rest of 2026, knowing what the calendar looks like, knowing that, whether or not they still have Tricks and Treats, or whether they still have Winterfest. And then I get, all of 2027 with it. So those were the 3 doors that I had a chance to look at. And my decision has been made, Ryan. I knew there was going to be an extension. There always is. I didn't think it was going to be a 2-week extension, till September 14th. Nobody saw that coming. That was unprecedented there, which tells a story, but not for this episode, maybe for another time. But but I picked my door. So which door do you think I've chosen, Ryan?
I think you're getting Prestige.
I am getting Prestige, yes. So I will be joining you. We will try to find a spot in the
VIP. We can hang out in the VIP lounge now.
Maybe we could do an episode from there, sitting at a table.
Oh, that's a good idea. They'd hate that. Okay,
they would
so
not do that. But anyway, yeah. But I do, like I said, it's. I was going to have to, as I looked at that and I was getting closer and closer to making my decision, I thought, had you not, gotten prestige, that, I thought you might, tell me that, I made a mistake or something, but I knew as you were looking at it and thinking about it, other people that I knew that had gold that were thinking about it ended up doing it.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it too is my daughter and her husband,
Mhm.
they bought the $99 gold pass. The offer was too good. They normally wouldn't be gold pass holders. They weren't this year. They weren't last year. They weren't the year before. They just felt that for that price, it wasn't worth it. But for $99, they thought, why not? So they've got that. They got the dining plan. My granddaughter's 7 months old right now. So, they want to take her up there, and she seems to like water. We've taken her to different places like Land of Illusion, in the summer months, and taken her into the water and that there. So it also became one of those things that I could go up with them. I could park in Prestige. They'd be that much closer to the front gate. With a young child that needs to be in a stroller and all that. So you're not going to have to wheel her down from, somewhere on the far north end of the parking lot or anything like that on those busier days, if we can get there early enough to get into that preferred lot. So that factored into my decision too, was just that, I probably would go with them, maybe once a week, every 10 days. And because of the age of my granddaughter and that, it just made sense to be as close as possible to the front gate.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the perks on it, and look at the wording. So includes tricks and treats, and it says unlimited Winterfest visits. It has similar language to the Haunt, but I haven't been able to find it. So if they do cancel, Winterfest, I'm sure that the park sycophants are going to say it said unlimited visits to Winterfest, not that they're going to have Winterfest. I
Yeah.
can just see it, and so they can park in their VIP parking, but not in December. They won't.
Well, look at the the fine print there. I'm sure says terms and conditions subject to change without notice.
Sure. But the thing though is you get the park apologists that throw that like, it says they can change the calendar however they want. They say terms are subject to change. I don't think that if there was a class action lawsuit saying like we purchased this product and there's a fundamental change in what you're offering, because Winterfest is one of your 4 major seasons, and we bought it saying that Winterfest is included and you're not doing Winterfest. I think that would hold up. I think that they're playing a really risky game with a lot of these parks. So, we're going to concentrate on on our core season. And if Kings Island pulls that language, I want everybody to call the park and ask what they're doing to concentrate on the core season. What are we going to see that's better in 2027 at the sacrifice of Winterfest? Like, there going to be? Is every restaurant going to be open? Is every ride going to be open? You going to staff everything? I want to know. Because if you're taking away some of the value of the pass, I want to know what I'm getting in exchange for it.
Yeah, I bought, under the assumption, what people say when you assume, under the assumption that there will be Haunt next year, that there will be Winterfest next year. Same with my daughter and her husband. They bought thinking, that it would be fun to go to Winterfest together. They think it's going to be kind of cool to go this year, to Winterfest together. And that, so, there's a lot of people buying under that assumption that those events are still going to be there. But we know, looking at what they've done at other parks, that that's not a guarantee. And
they do not hesitate to pull the rug out right at the most opportune minute. In fact, I was a little surprised. Even when passes went on sale, I could see them selling passes and then like for 2027 and it includes Winterfest, and then just kidding, we're not doing Winterfest anymore. I could absolutely see them doing that.
Would I be surprised if they didn't have Winterfest in 2026? No, I would not be surprised. Do I think that's going to happen? I think they'll still have it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't, just because of the way it's gone. And there's not a whole lot of parks left in the portfolio that have a winter event anymore. You look at the number of Six Flags parks, they're Holiday in the Park, and no longer.
There's got to be a reason why they kept Kings Islands and Canada's Wonderlands, because when they pulled the plug for Winterfest under Paramount, they did it for all the parks. I've got a feeling that maybe there's something about those 2 parks. Now, there's some other ones that are in like warmer climates that make perfect sense, but Cincinnati and Toronto, there's something about that made it so they wanted to keep the event.
Yeah, I remember when King's Dominion pulled the plug.
And Carowinds.
Yeah, when King's Dominion pulled the plug this summer, they gave everybody as compensation, like a bring a friend ticket. I think it was to
Yay.
Carowinds. And it's like, great, so I get a perk that I have to drive 3 or 4 hours for. That didn't go over very well. But speaking of
Well,
King's Dominion too, did you notice on their website under the season pass benefits, whether it's gold or whether it's prestige, unlike other parks, it does not say a word about water park. Not a
you've
word.
been speculating for months, ever since they launched their
Yeah,
pass program, that they may just not open Soak City next year.
I can see that as a cost cutting measure that they don't.
Mhm.
But I found it interesting. Kings Island says, that you get the water park. It just, right there with Winterfest, Haunt, and everything else. Kings Dominion, not a mention about the water park. And even on their final weekend, Labor Day weekend for the year for the water park, multiple attractions weren't even open. They had half of the water park even like fenced off that you couldn't even get to it. And I just think that was just odd to me. I found that very interesting that, every year leading up to this year, they included that in the language for King's Dominion, but not this year. And speaking of King's Dominion too, whoever does their stuff in terms of, sending out those kabillion text messages that I get and emails that I get, to buy my King's Dominion season pass, you would think after 50 years, someone would know that there's not an apostrophe in Kings. But every time I get one, there's the apostrophe in Kings for King's Dominion. And
the emails for Kings Island do that too. The email blasts.
Yeah, but how sloppy can you get? And if you can't even get the name of the park spelled right, how much confidence do you have that they're going to have, everything with the product right? So that's the first impression for people, is just seeing, something in writing there. And if you can't even spell your name right, I think that's kind of a red flag for me too, a little bit sometimes with some parks.
Yeah, but back to the passes. I wanted to bring this up. So I mocked up a payment. So for $407 a month, you get prestige plus dining plus the drink plan plus, which you highly recommend. From
What'd you say, 407 a month?
That's this year, $407.99 a month. I'm sorry, $407.99 total. Not a month.
I was gonna say a month. Wait a minute, I'll buy a brand new car if that's the case.
That's a Disney. That's slightly lower than my car payment.
Yeah.
So this is an approximation. I used the Wayback Machine along with AI, ChatGPT, to figure out how much this would cost last year with the Prestige Pass, and the math works out to about $629 total. So $407.99 this year and $629 last year. So for anybody that wants to say like, oh, I went back on my word or whatever, I don't even consider this the same subject, the same product, or anything like that. When it's $99 more rather than $225 more.
Well, it was a business decision you made not to get it, and it's a business decision to take advantage of something that they're basically giving away, for $199. So you got to jump on that. For me, one of the another compelling reason was just that single use fast lane, because I think that would work well if I went to some other parks, and that there'd be rides that I definitely want to get in. It adds value to my visit, because that time I'm saving by using that fast lane, I'm going to get to ride something else I wouldn't have, or maybe 2 rides that I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So I think there was some value there. So I felt good about it. I think mine came to the math is 433 is what
that might include taxes and stuff.
Yeah, 433 with everything. And that is that taxes that they say, includes taxes and fees and that. So it added that in there, but I paid it up front, one payment. I didn't want to do the monthly payment thing. Same thing with my Kennywood pass, for 2026, I just paid it up front. I didn't feel like, ooh, should I do this? That's $400 something. I didn't think that. I just thought, I think I'm getting a good deal here, and went ahead and took advantage of it.
Absolutely. So do whatever decision's right for you. I want to hear in the comments, especially for those of you who got burnt back in 2003 with the Prestige. Have you turned the corner like I did? I want to hear why, and what benefits that are there are the most attractive to you. I'm going to guess and say for most people, it's a single-use fast lane. I'm completely on board with that.
Yeah.
Let's move on to a segment we like to call Buy or Sell. Don, buy or sell? Congo Falls has given its last ride.
This is really hard for me because my heart says I hope it didn't. But knowing the way things are going across the chain, that rides are being retired, they're looking to save costs on things. That has been a ride with a lot of downtime. The Kings Island maintenance team did a fantastic job this summer keeping that ride going, because I would think if that was maybe another park in the chain, that they would have just called it a day, and that wouldn't have run the last 2 or 3 months of the season. So tip of the hat there to the maintenance department, because they did what they had to do to keep that running. And same thing with Whitewater Canyon. But I do feel that maybe its time has come. It opened in 1988. You still have the Flume ride that and right now Whitewater Canyon, so there's still water attractions in the main park. I think if you're looking at future expansion, that spot right there in Action Zone is a perfect spot to build something. You might have to get rid of another thing or two to do that if you want to build something that's a little more massive there. But I'm going to go with, I hate to do this, and I have no inside information, but I'm going to buy.
I'm going to sell, simply based on when we get good information, it's usually good, but when we speculate, we're usually wrong.
Yeah,
so
that's what we're doing here. We're speculating.
We're just speculating here. So my head says it's probably the last year, but my heart says to go ahead and sell for that reason. So
I will tell you that, and it goes even back to when Vortex was removed. It's never an easy decision to remove a ride. Nobody wants to see something go. Even Boo Blasters. I mean, you have to look to the future, and you want to. It was time. It's 15 years with that, but there's still that. When you have to pull the trigger and make that final decision there, sometimes. So nobody would want to see Congo Falls go. Nobody would want to see Whitewater Canyon and Vertigo, any of the other rides that have been speculated over the last, 18 months since they started, getting rid of rides across the company. But I'm going to go with, I don't think we'll see it next year.
You don't think we'll see it next year? Probably no plan for a replacement either, but
no, I just don't. I just know that it was, like I said, it took a lot to keep it going, and I appreciate that effort by the maintenance department. But just something just tells me, because it's, you can't have these other parks saying, well, we got to remove 2 or 3 rides. Why didn't they? And eventually, you get that. You can't have all that resentment within the company. They're going to have to pick their battles, and they're going to have to lose somewhere. And that's one of the rides that I could see, okay, that's not one worth fighting for.
Yeah. We'll be right back with the listener questions. All right, first listener question, Ben from Germantown, Ohio. He said, "Hey, Ryan and Don, my 3-year-old son has been on a boomerang kick lately. He loves watching Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, Yogi Bear, and Tom and Jerry. That got me thinking. Tom and Jerry were created by Hanna-Barbera, but I can't seem to remember being featured in the park. Were they, and I just can't remember, or were they left out due to a different license agreement?"
I don't.
Tom and Jerry part of the park.
I don't remember them in the park. I remember seeing them on, different, when you would show the whole Hanna-Barbera family, and some pictures in that. They do like the, the little graphics renderings and that, and they would have the whole cartoon group out there. They'd be in something like that, but in terms of walk around characters, no. I don't know what the reason would have been why they weren't, because they were pretty popular characters back in the day.
Right.
But, the ones, Fred Flintstone, the other Flintstone characters, Barney, you saw Dino, you saw Pebbles, you had Captain Caveman, Jabberjaw, Quick Draw McGraw, those characters were all out there. So they had a lot of them. And it was always, when you came into the park too, they were always out front on International Street. So you didn't have to go to Hanna-Barbera Land to get those character meet and greets and those photos and that. They were all out there greeting the guests as everybody come in. And, if they do some kind of a switch, and the contract expires and they move to Looney Tunes, I would hope that, it'd be something that they would bring back, is to have those characters out front in the morning from like 9:30 to 10:15 to 10:30 range, just meeting the guests as they come in. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I really am looking forward to when the finances are in order and we can work with the upside of this. Having that wide library of characters and having DC and all that, but also not being saddled with all the debt from Six Flags as a result.
No, you don't need that. You got to kind of work that down a little bit.
All right. Andrew from Beaver Creek, Ohio said, in your opinion, why did Kings Island choose to use Sally Dark Rides instead of R&R Creative for the new Phantom Theater attraction?
I think, when you look at Sally Dark Rides, they do good work.
Mhm.
I think that's a reason that you would want to go with them. I think that they, would have presented a really good concept idea, to bring Phantom Theater back in the way that it's going to be brought back. And I've been on a number of Sally Dark Rides, around the country. And, I think they did, they do good work. I know a lot of people, will point to Boo Blasters, and that was a bunch of cardboard cutouts, and before that, Scooby Doo and the Haunted Mansion. But I think sometimes some of that also is, they had to work within what the budget was going to be for that. When Boo Blasters came in, there wasn't a lot of money left over to do something there, and they had to move it out because the Peanuts were coming in, so they couldn't keep Scooby Doo in that there, so they had to do something else. So they did what they could with what the money was allotted for that. So I just think it's because that they were the best fit for what they want to do.
And I've heard that R&R Creative, Rick Bastrop, is involved. I've heard a rumor of that. I don't quote me on that because I'm not sure, but I've heard that he is. I don't know who owns those characters. I imagine the park does, not him.
Yeah, he would have been involved maybe in putting the story together and that, and then Sally does all the the rest. But I have no problem with the direction that they're going with this.
Yeah, Sally does good work. I mean, they've made some notable dark rides and stuff, but they'll also make like stuff that like on a budget, So they made the Justice League rides, which are really good. The Great Humbug Adventure at Santa's Village, Challenge of Tutankhamun at Wallaby, Belgium, Boo Blasters on Boo Hill, showing you. But the most notable one, I wish I had this photo put up, is they did the Sesame Street Dark Ride. Where is it? Portaventura in Spain. And I saw the animatronics for that of like Big Bird and stuff at IAPA.
Oh, those were good, yeah.
That's the best animatronic I've ever seen from Sally's, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah, like I said, I think they do good work, and can't wait to experience that attraction in the spring.
Joe and Amanda from Highland Heights, Kentucky. My wife and I were discussing Don's record on the racer. Don, you're a dinner table conversation. You know that? Anyway, do you know what your count is forward versus backwards? Do you think the number of rides backwards should be reduced from the overall tally? That's always been my theory. If you ride 5 times frontwards but twice backwards, you only net 3.
You only have net 3, right? No, I knew the percentage. And the park knew the percentage. At the time I did my 10,000th ride, it was around 70% forward, 30% backwards, just because I had a head start. I had 1,300 rides before they even flipped one side around.
Mm-hmm.
With that. So, the percentages were that was maybe 65-35, at 1.2 or something. But no, they didn't want the way that they wanted to do it. The record was for the most non-consecutive rides on the racer. They considered that one ride. The name of the ride was singular. That was something that Ruth Voss always told me, it's one ride. So that'll open a can of worms in the comments that it's 2 credits and all that. But anyway, it was something that they didn't know if it was going to be a novelty, thing. It was only going to be there for one season, it ended up being 26 seasons. But because of that, when we were doing those, records back then, the park just felt, was just accumulative, across both sides, because we weren't keeping it, difference between north and south, so the same thing could have been said there, that each one would have been its own thing. But no, they just wanted the total number of rides, and they would include that, in the stories after it became backwards, that I spend, some of my rides come on the backward side of the only full-length backwards traveling roller coaster in the country. So they would drop something like that in too. But no, never had to separate that. And the exact number, no, I just know that, you can, I could kind of estimate what the percentage was. So I never tracked it just because they didn't want me to. They didn't care.
So if you've got your own questions, send them to hosts@towertopics.com. That's hosts@towertopics.com. Send your first name, the city you're from, as well as your question, comment, concern, and we'd love to feature it on the show. Alternatively, if you're hip, you can send us a text or leave us a voicemail, 513-399-7538. That's 513-399-7538. If you send us a text, we'll read it just like today. If you send us a voicemail, we might actually feature the actual voicemail on the show. So we'd love to
have more voicemails. Yeah, more voicemails. Those have been fun when we've used them, and we can see how you're feeling that question. I guess the way it's asked and stuff, sometimes that makes a little bit of a difference too. But anyway, we just appreciate getting the questions that do get submitted. But wait, there's more. We have a Facebook group. Just search it, Tower Topics. On Facebook, you'll find the group. If you're a Kings Island fan, you're a fan of Tower Topics, it's a good place to join. We have a community now that is getting close to around 3,000 members, and it's grows every day. And it's just a lot of good conversations, people sharing their park experiences, whether that's good, bad, indifferent, or whatever. They ask questions. There's a lot of good questions out there that people have, and there's some people that understand how the different products and things work at the park that are part of that group that are there to jump in and help give those answers. The only we're not censoring anything. You can say what you want. It's free speech in there. The only thing that we ask is that you're respectful to the other members. As long as you do that, you have a place in the Tower Topics Facebook group, as long as the group page is there, and we'd like you to join.
Yeah, we'd love to have that. So thanks for sticking with us to the end. Episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, bright and early at 5 a.m. We're available on YouTube and everywhere that you can find podcasts. I'm Ryan Sir. That's Don Helbig. This is Tower Topics.